Okay, if we can settle down now, we do have 2 more applications to get through. Thank you. Right, agenda item 15, which is on page 83, is the Arborfield Garrison and Adjoining Land. It's an application for reserved matters, which is layout, scale, appearance and landscaping for a primary school to be undertaken on a phased basis, including hardcourt play area, all-weather pitch, clubhouse, garage and associated access, parking and landscaping. It's before the committee. It's a major application and the applicant is Woking Borough Council and the case officer is Alex Thwaites, so I shall just hand over to him.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. As the Chair said, I'm presenting the Reserved Matters application for the erection of a new primary school, which includes a nursery as well. The school is to be proposed to be delivered in 2 phases. Phase 1 consisting of a 2-form entry, or 2FE, and Phase 2 being the 3-form entry. The proposals includes a hardcourt play area, all-weather pitch, changing pavilion and parking. And as the Chair said again, the applicant is WBC, Woking Borough Council. So to give a bit of background, the site relates to land just north of Biggs Lane, within the former MOD garrison site in Arborfield. The proposal is located within the Arborfield Strategic Development Location, or SDL for short, and planning permission for the outline for that site was granted in April 2015. Again, just as a reminder, the Arborfield SDL is to be delivered by 2 large-scale applications, with this school being located within the northern section, which is now known as Arborfield Green. I've just got this map up here to show the SDL in its entirety, so the whole of Arborfield SDL. And you can see Biggs Lane is right to the north of that proposal area, sorry. And that's just where the application site is located. To focus a bit more on the northern section, I've highlighted the sites here on the approved land use plan. I've also highlighted the Boat Hunt Secondary School so you can see where it is in comparison to that. Another location plan. This is the latest area of the site, showing where it is in comparison to the main access roads. I've marked on there the primary school access road on there. I'll come on to that a bit later, but essentially that joins onto Biggs Lane. It is called primary access road at the moment because we've not given it a name. It's not the most glamorous, but that's how the site's accessed. So, as described earlier, the proposal is to be phased. Phase 1 is a 2-form entry school. Phase 2 is a 3-form entry school. At outline stage, the development as a whole, so that's the whole, the northern section of the SDL was assessed, and a 2-form entry school was considered appropriate for the new number of residents. The second phase is being put forward by the council in its application as future-proofing. Simply, should the demand ever be required in the future, then the school has capacity to expand. So to consider the actual layout of the school, the physical building is located to the north of the site, adjacent to the access points in the car park. The all-weather pitch is located to the south of the site, next to Biggs Lane and the external play areas. The building itself is laid out in an N shape, with the main teaching block on the east and the hall and nursery on the west hand side adjacent to the drop-off point. At phase 2, the layout of the school remains generally the same, as the internal spaces remain in situ from phase 1. The main differences I've highlighted on red on this slide are the extension to the teaching block to the south, which is this section, and the increase in the amount of parking to the north. The rest of the internal spaces don't require changes, as at phase 1 there's an over-provisional space provided. In terms of the design of the school, the proposal has been designed to be modern in appearance, and at maximum is 2 stories in height. This represents very similar designs to that of schools that we've approved elsewhere in the borough. This is just a 3D render of the proposal, with the main hall and entrance being on this side. Again, some more visuals of how the school would look externally. So, moving on to the internal and external spaces for the school. For clarity, the proposal is fully compliant with BB 103 of the Area Guidelines for Mainstream Schools document, which is essentially the main document for school space standards. In terms of the internal space, the proposal exceeds the baseline guidelines given within the document for both phase 1 and phase 2. Externally, the external spaces, the proposal is compliant with the standards, and during the first phase of the development, the proposal far exceeds the standards. It's worth noting at this point that due to its durability and ability to be used all year round, the all-weather pitch is permitted to be counted twice against the guidelines. And while not required for the first phase of development, the all-weather pitch has been delivered from the start regardless, due to its dual community use. Access and movement. The proposal is accessed off the primary school access roads, which adjoins Biggs Lane, and the site uses an in and out system to create a circulation system. The proposal also delivers drop-off spaces, staff parking spaces, motorbike spaces, secure cycle spaces and scooter spaces, all of which are compliant with WBC policy. Again, as discussed, a section of the parking is only to be delivered should the school expand to phase 2, and this is secured via condition. The all-weather pitch will be delivered from the start of the proposal, and this will include a FIFA 1-star quality pitch. Just jumping forwards a little bit to the members' update, the floodlighting and management of this pitch has been secured by 2 conditions, and both of those are in the members' update. So that's, when I say floodlighting, I mean levels of floodlighting as well as hours of use. And finally, just to touch on the sprinkler system for the school. While the school sprinkler system is controlled under building regulations and therefore not considered a material consideration under the planning, we have worked with the applicant in order to secure a system that includes sprinkler tanks, sprinkler heads in classroom ceilings, and a pump house in the school. And that's all that's included within the design and access statement that was submitted with the application. So just before going on to the recommendation, I've mentioned it already, but the members' update contains 3 conditions, 2 relating to the floodlighting management of the all-weather pitch, and a final one which secures safe construction of the school should it need to be expanded, so that will be detailing information of how they're going to build that last bit out. So therefore the recommendation is that the committee grants permission subject to the conditions in the report and the members' update. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We have one registered speaker, which is Piers Bunning, on behalf of the applicant. If you'd like to come forward. Good evening to you.
Good evening. First off,
No.
Red light come on when it's on.
fun.
You've been here before, Chris?
It's not fun.
Angus, could you just have a quick look?
Great bit in the middle.
So, it's okay, apologies. Good evening, Chair. I'm Piers Brumming from the Council Strategy and Commissioning Team. I'm here to speak in favour of the Arborfield Primary School scheme. The scheme has been a key component of the infrastructure plans for the Arborfield SDL since its inception. It will be the first of 2 new primary schools to serve this new community. In the first phase, it will offer up to 420 places with a nursery. It can be extended to provide up to 630 places if demand should grow beyond our current expectations. The building is designed to deliver a 21st century curriculum, be inclusive with level access on each floor and a lift. It will provide a good teaching environment, meeting national standards for lighting, acoustics and ventilation, have a full range of teaching spaces and be fully wired for the digital curriculum. Externally, the site has been designed for dual school and community use. The sports and recreation areas have been designed to comply with the National Premises Standards, the area guidelines for mainstream schools or Building Bulletin 103, and have a mixture of age-appropriate formal and informal areas, including a dedicated space for the early years area and a netball court. The key dual-use facility, though, will be a large all-weather pitch with a supporting pavilion. This will be an important part of the local community provision, as well as being of great value to the school. Because of their resilience, artificial surfaces are worth twice their actual area in the assessment of school site area. Grass pitches can only be used intensively for a few hours each week, while all-weather pitches can be used every day for a full day's activity. We know that school run traffic is a problem across the borough and that community sports facilities need parking. Here, dedicated community and school drop-off parking has been provided to supplement the school staff car parking. Additionally, there will be storage for cycles and scooters to help encourage children to travel by sustainable means, minimising the use of the car. I therefore hope the committee can support this application.
You still need that. That's very valuable. Right. We don't have any board members, so I can ask the committee for questions. Angus, first then.
Thank you. Perhaps it was a pity that the agenda didn't include a map as to where this was on the site, but I think we worked it out in the end. I think it's a very good principle to future-proof this application. I would just mention about sprinklers that the provision was because it is a policy of this council that schools should have sprinklers. Okay, it's not a planning issue, we'll move on. My one question then is, I don't find from here, and maybe it was covered in the previous outline, as to when this should be conditioned to be provided. Is it a certain number of houses on the SDL, or is it just that the demand was seen as a demand by our Children's Services Department?
So in terms of the first phase, or essentially, the first phase, this is secured via the legal agreement in the original outline to be built prior to the occupation of the 250th dwelling. And in terms of the second phase, that is just simply based on demand.
Wayne?
Alex, if you look at the plan, so what Piers suggested that the school will start off from about 420, rising potentially to 600. He also talked about the provision of parking for the all-weather facility, which I think is a fantastic idea. 11 spaces for 400 plus pupils, 40 to 1 roughly. I know it's a great intention for people to get on their scooters and get on their bikes, but it doesn't happen in reality, and it does cause congestion outside of school. Not to redesign the scheme, Chairman, I'm not going to go there, but would there be any scope? Because at the bottom end, by the all-weather pitch, there seems to be a lot of area there that could have potentially been used to put parking bays in, etc. Because I think that is quite a congested road. That's Biggs Lane, is it?
Biggs Lane's down here, so that road essentially comes up off the train.
Is that road a through road? To build on Angus's point. So the traffic goes up that road. Where does that road lead to?
So just to come back to this it's one of the main roads within the development, so it's a bus route as well, so it'll come around this way.
Yeah. So you see my point. If you've got 11, 40 to 1, it would have been nice if we could have provided more if we had land there, but I don't know how that was that ever looked at, especially around the all-weather pitch. So as it stands at the moment, we've got the 11 spaces plus 37 spaces for teachers and staff right at the top, but no other parking for anybody else at the weekend. So their intention is they use those 37 spaces at the top.
Yeah, so during school, so the all-weather sports pitch won't be used during school hours, it will be for the sole use of the school. Then after hours, the parking and the sports pitch, they'll be both available outside of the school hours, meaning that all the parking is available. Just picking up on your point about congestion, I think the benefit that we have here is, I don't disagree with that the borough does have some issues around some of the schools, as do nearly every school I think in the country. But in this area, if you go back to the bigger plan, there's obviously 3,500 houses being built in this location, 2 primary schools and a secondary school in the centre. All of which, this is under the new core strategy. We've got new footpath cycleways, the greenways running through here. You've got a lot of infrastructure that's going in as a result. And the travel plan, working with the local authority and the developer, who's one large sole developer managing the whole of the site. The intention is that we will the developers will be delivering on obviously our request and working through with them through planning all this infrastructure to ensure as best as possible that these people obviously do walk and cycle to school. But it is worth picking up that in terms of the parking standards, this exceeds the council's parking standards, which is only 1 space per staff member. So in terms of this scheme, there is drop-off pickup, circulatory system as well inside the site. It's got an entrance at the top and exit to the south, which is much better than most schools that just have a single point of entrance, which is shared.
I think just to quickly add to that as well, this application has come forward because it's part of the outline application. This school is for this community, it's for this development, and as Chris said, we've been working quite hard with the developer on the site to make sure that things like greenways, bridleways, cycleways are all up to scratch, and the links, particularly through the site, are quite impressive, and we'll continue that going forward.
No, I absolutely, it's the absolute right strategy and the right theory. We just Piers needs to take it away, that he needs to work with the school from day one to make sure that they drill this into the parents. Because if they don't, we're going to have the same problem, because we have the highest ownership of cars in the UK, so we have got a bigger problem, hasn't we? To make sure that we don't have these issues, because it is a pain in the neck around the borough.
Thank you, Wayne. Michelle?
Two things. Offhand, thank you very much for putting sprinklers in the school. It's a very good idea. Second of all, I agree with Wayne. I live near 2 schools. And no matter how much you're going to tell me that we're going to have all these plans, the plans don't necessarily work out when parents have to suddenly drop their child off and then leave and go to work. And they're probably not going to let the child walk to school. There seems to be some fear of having children walking by themselves. So I just don't think the plans actually work. I think we do have to have enough spaces to make sure. Second of all, when parents pick up their children, they don't just come and pick up their children. They come about an hour before school, and they wind up sitting there and talking to each other more than anything else. And it causes congestion. It's going to be a mess. No matter how much you promise it's going to do that, I can almost promise you it's going to happen. The same problem we've had before. How are you going to change that?
We've already had the answer, Michelle. We've had the answer. It exceeds policy. So it's not a reason for refusal if it exceeds policy.
I'm not trying to refuse it. I'm just trying to find out what special plan he's got that's going to work that's never worked before.
Well, what hasn't worked for on existing sites around the borough is with these as well, through the section 106, which Alex mentioned, we've secured parking management strategies. So in there's a series of measures that we can trigger the developer to implement. So for example, if there is, as you say, congestion, parents turn up early, wish to park, they start parking on the road, which is then going to be a bus route, then we'll apply parking management strategy, which is for the developer to implement at their cost. So it could be that we double yellow lines, school zigzags outside the area, and to a point that we can enforce now through the CPE that the council has controls on, and to the point that if it has to be a larger area, it's a larger area, which will then force parents to walk and have to cycle in because they have no ability to park or stop out on the road.
Lots of luck.
Thank you.
Any other member wishing to ask a question?
Just a query. Just in the car parking, you've got 5 non-electrical charging bays, 5 passive. What are passive electrical charging bays?
It's so the installation of the power supply is in there. There's no, that's my understanding, because we've got there's two types. So there's ones I think ready to go, and the other ones the power supply is ready to be connected to if required. So it's just prepared rather than have to dig up the infrastructure later.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's fine. The only other thing there, sorry, just one other thing. When vehicles come in the entrance and they turn left, either to go to the staff parking or to facilitate the drop off, there's a barrier that stops the visitors entering the staff area, understandable.
Yep.
Is there going to be congestion there that they're trying to get back out? How do they, they're going to reverse out or in this drop off? Because you've got disabled parking, blue badge parking area one side, so you're leaving just, 9 areas for parking the other side. Are you going to have different parking chocolate up down the middle?
Well, in terms of the management of that, that's something obviously that we managed by the school. I would suspect, they're not going to, it's not going to go down at 9 o'clock and then the teacher hasn't made it into the car park, won't make it in. So it will be, typically I would imagine it's going to be open a lot of the time. Once the staff are in there, they may shut it down at some point. But I think it's just to be able to control the parking from the school's perspective. I don't think it's going to be forceful that it's they're going to make an issue with it. But that will get reviewed as part of the parking review on site.
Any more? Okay. Right, we have the recommendation then on page 84 for approval. There are the 3 additional conditions in members' update, which the officer has been through, and then we have numerous pages of further conditions. So we're all clear on that. All those in favour of passing this application, please show, and that is unanimous. Thank you, members. If you're not here for the final application, if you could, if you wish to.
You've got to keep trying.
Sorry?
You've got to keep
I
trying.
know, but it doesn't happen. People go to work.
Right, we have the final application on the agenda tonight. Thank you for being so patient. I realise it's been 2 hours listening to certain other ones. So this is agenda item 16 on page 117. It's the land adjacent to, I might pronounce it wrongly, but Cartref Farm and Islandstone Lane. It's an application of varying conditions 4 and 5 with planning consent 153-360 to increase the number of caravans from 2 to 4 and increase the number of pitches from 1 to 2. It's before the committee as it's been listed, and members went on a site visit on Friday. And case officer is Daniel Ray.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, the application is to vary the conditions to essentially create an additional pitch within the existing site, thereby increasing the number of caravans from 2 to 4, 2 being static, 2 being touring. There's also the demolition of the existing stable and the erection of a replacement. The application site is situated to the southeast of the village of Hurst, off Islandstone Lane, just to the north of Nelson's Lane. By way of background, planning permission was granted for a single pitch at the site by appeal. The inspectorate found that the site was in a location that was sustainable, would have no demonstrable impact on the highway network, have no impact or negative impact on the local ecology, and was in a location that would not be harmful to the character and appearance of the area. The inspector did, however, only grant temporary consent given the risk of flooding on the site based on the evidence at the time. However, an application was submitted in 2015 and approved at committee in 2016 for the permanent occupation, as the level of permeable surface within the site was such that it was no longer the harm or risk to the occupiers as might have been feared. As a result, permanent consent applies for a single pitch with 1 static caravan and 1 touring caravan on site. There's also consent for a utility day room, and a stable was erected on the western edge of the site, and horses are kept in the paddock to the south. This application proposes to vary conditions 4 and 5 to allow the erection of a new stable on the eastern boundary and the introduction of a second static caravan with touring caravan on the site. The revised conditions would reflect the submitted plans and also limit the number of vehicles on the site. Just going over the stable briefly, the stable itself would be a wooden structure and the size is considered commensurate to the paddock. It would be well screened by the existing boundary planting on Islandstone Lane near the entrance. However, some views would be afforded from the south near Nelson's Lane. The design and appearance of the stable in this location, given the use of the paddock and adjacent land uses, is not unexpected in an area such as this. It is accepted, though, that the existing mobile home does cause harm to or has an impact on the character and appearance of the area. However, the planning inspectorate found that this was not harmful enough to warrant refusal, nor was it an overriding consideration when they granted the first consent. The proposal is not for a new gypsy and travel site, but is for the intensification of the use of the site. The proposal for the variation to allow a static caravan and touring caravan as well as a stable is all that is proposed. The principle of development has already been established. Instead, the key material planning considerations are what are the additional harms that arise from the introduction of a new static caravan and all the other things proposed, and intensification of the use of the site. It's considered the intensification of use would not have an undue impact on ecology, nor introduce hard standing significant enough to change the drainage within the site. The additional movements associated with the residential use would not have an unacceptable impact on highway terms, and the site is no less sustainable for 2 caravans than it is for 1, an issue the inspector has already concluded on. Landscape and trees officers have considered the impact of the additional activity and the introduction of a second static caravan, and considered that the harm associated with the new structure in this location would be less than substantial, although harm does arise. The harm, however, could be mitigated through an appropriate landscaping scheme and would have the knock-on effect of breaking up the appearance of the existing static caravan from views from the south as well, thus potentially leading to a betterment of the site. As a result, an additional condition requiring a landscaping scheme would be required to be submitted prior to the first occupation of the additional caravan, and this has been included within the report. A number of objections have arisen, notably that it goes against policy CP11 and CP3 within the core strategy, with an unacceptable impact on the countryside, and that the site is in an unsustainable location. However, the inspectorate have already considered that this would not warrant refusal. Additionally, the harm from the new structure would be mitigated by this condition and additional planting. Another issue that's being raised is that the council has a 5-year supply of pitches, and that is absolutely accepted. The council have been robust in its approach to the need and supply, and argue strongly that we do. However, the supply of pitches in personal circumstances of the applicants is not a consideration unless the development would be unacceptable for other reasons. Indeed, the national policy for gypsy and travel sites is explicitly clear that we need to have criteria-based policy to assess applications whether there's an identified need or not. This is the same as we wouldn't refuse an acceptable planning application if it's acceptable, even if we had a 5-year land supply. Whilst it has been put toward the council that the proposed applicants are not travellers, the personal circumstance is not to be considered unless the application were unacceptable for other reasons. In any case, it's been proposed that condition 5 also be varied, so that any current or future occupiers are required to meet the national planning criteria of what constitutes a gypsy traveller. If the occupiers are found to no longer be transient, then they would be in breach of the consent and enforcement action could then take place. Just a couple of updates this evening. First of all, the name of the applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Giles, were excluded from the front sheet. Also, the Hurst Parish Council's objections being included in the update in full, although it was considered in the report. That was my error to not actually include the objection reasons. Also, just a minor clarification on a reference, I think, in paragraph 24. As per the report, this application is recommended for the approval of the variation of conditions 4 and 5, the variation of condition 3 for the criteria of the occupants, but also the inclusion of new conditions relating to materials of the stable, no lighting or a scheme of lighting, and as advised of the landscape condition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have 3 pre-registered speakers then. The first one being Howard Larkin on behalf of Hurst Parish Council. Would you like to come forward? Good evening, Tim. It's the grey box. That's it. You're away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Howard Larkin and I am a member of the St Nicholas Hurst Parish Council. The Parish Council did object to this application, and I thank the officer for updating you due to the error in the agenda in front of you. This application represents a major intensification of the use of the site within the countryside and is covered by Ctte 11 that the application fails to address. It is an unsustainable location. Access is via narrow, single-track roads. The roads are known to flood, despite them being in the Environment Agency 1 in 75-year zone. They have flooded 6 times since 1947, most recently in 2007 and 2011. Access to schools and shops is too far to even consider pedestrian access, especially as there is no pavement on the roads. In addition, we are in receipt today of a statement of WBC's position on the 5-year supply of Grafton gypsy and traveller pitches. The WBC can show an 11.54-year supply, and they state in paragraph 13 of their statement there, and I'll read it out. At the 31st of March 2018, the Council can demonstrate an 11.54-year land supply for gypsy and traveller pitches. Ladies and gentlemen, please refuse this application for all the reasons that I've given you. Thank you.
The next speaker I have is Lou Robinson on behalf of the Hurst Village Society. And yes, if you could keep the camera on myself, please. I'm good, son.
Where's that?
Good evening.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Lou Robinson and I'm here to represent Hurst Village Society. Hurst Village Society was founded in the 1970s with the primary aim to preserve and enhance the character of the village of Hurst. HVS wrote to Wokingham Borough Council objecting to this application, and we continue to object for the reasons set out in that letter. We would like to make the following additional comments. WBC confirms in the summary for this meeting that there is a 5-year supply of GRT pitches. I received today confirmation from a WBC Senior Planning Officer that the Council can demonstrate an 11.54 year supply. Therefore, using these supply figures, it is not appropriate to vary conditions 4 and 5 of the original planning permission. Because there is now no need for additional pitches, we object to the proposed unnecessary intensification of the site, which will have a detrimental impact on the character of the area. The current static home is very large. To accommodate another static home of similar size, they are proposing to move the stables to the front of the site. The proposed stables, which are over twice the size of the existing stables, would dominate that street scene. The site will be intensified and thus will change the definable character of the land, especially when the additional touring caravan and ancillary building are taken into account. According to PPTS August 2015 Policy H, Para 25, local planning authorities should very strictly limit new traveller site development in open countryside, that is away from existing settlements or outside of areas allocated in the development plan. The additional pitch on this site is outside the existing settlement and outside the development limit by some considerable distance. Under Equality Act 2010, the Planning Committee need to consider bearing in mind that there are now sufficient GRT pitches. If a member of the settled community were to apply for consent for a permanent caravan on this site, it would not be likely to be granted as it would infringe the local development plan. The summary informs us that the proposed occupants would be the parents of Mr Giles and that personal circumstances of applicants should be weighed in the planning balance. Therefore, HVS would like assurance that before making a decision on this application, Woking Borough Council can confirm they have carried out proper due diligence on behalf of the community it represents to ensure that they are satisfied that the proposed occupants meet the definition of a traveller as stated in the PPTS. In particular, that the proposed occupants have ceased to travel temporarily. Finally, I would like to remind the committee that in the absence of other material considerations of sufficient weight to override the development plan, which typically prohibit new housing development in the open countryside, the development plan should prevail and the application should be refused.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay, the final speaker tonight is Matthew Green, the agent. Good evening to you.
Good evening. A few points that have come up that I will address. The most important thing is this is not a new gypsy and traveller site. It's an existing gypsy and traveller site. The use of land is already permitted. So what is being sought here is a variation on the number of caravans. That is an intensification, but it isn't an intensification that would lead to a material change of use, because in a neighbouring authority, Bracknell, a Court of Appeal case, the case of Reed and Bracknell, said that a doubling of the number of caravans was unlikely to be lead to a material change of use through intensification. So you're actually looking at something that, oddly, in the way of case law, is less than development. That's actually quite important because it's been put to you that CP11 and other things haven't been taken into account. Well, if they were, that would be incorrect as a matter of law. And the reason it would be incorrect as a matter of law is you're not looking at new development here. You're looking at varying a condition on an existing consent. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't things that could be material considerations, and they include the impact on character and appearance. They could, theoretically, include flooding. They could include highways movements. Those are all potentially material effects of increasing the number of caravans. But your officers have looked at these. The issues of flooding and highways have been clearly dealt with elsewhere. This is a sustainable site, and that has also been considered, and indeed said so by an inspector, and that national policy is still extant. So the only issue here that could be material in front of you is the issue of character and appearance. And your own landscape officers have said that by granting this with a condition, that would require a new landscaping scheme, that would actually lead to a betterment than the existing situation at the moment. So it seems to me that you're actually in a position where you can improve the situation as it exists at the moment, rather than lead to any detraction from where we are at the moment. I'm not going to go into 5-year supply. I'm sure you know my name. I'm sure I've talked enough in these council offices about it. As you've heard, it's not necessary in this case, because the national policy, just like it would be if someone applied for houses within a development boundary, gypsy and traveller sites within an existing site, additional ones, are not a matter that depends on whether you have a 5-year land supply or not. We can save that all for another day, you'll be relieved to know. I do hope you consider what this application actually is. It is merely a variation of condition, and it is the opportunity for you to impose a landscaping scheme that would improve the current situation. Thank you very much.
Boo! Quiet, please. Okay. So I've listened to the speakers, and I do have a number of points that I would like to put to you, Daniel, before I go to Wayne and the other members. So the intensification within the countryside and CP11, the unsustainable location, the roads likely to flood, the land supply, and if you could just go over again the checks that have been done to ensure we are talking about additional travellers, and the final one, which is the changing character.
Thank you. Yeah, to go over a few of those a bit more in detail, starting with the checks of whether or not they're travellers or not. We confirmed who they were going to be in their relationship, but the site doesn't have permission on a personal consent. It's not a named consent based on their personal need and requirement. The key part of this is the variation to condition 3, which is the criteria of who can live there, which in the Annex 1 of the National Planning Policy for traveller sites, it sets out who is a traveller, and it's all to be being transient. Now, this site, as set out in the report, has been considered acceptable by officers. That's our recommendation. But whoever lives there, whether it's Mr. Giles or if they move and another family decide to move in, they would have to meet that criteria, and that's the crux of it. It's not about the Gileses, it's about the site and whether or not it's acceptable in planning terms. And there's that clause in the condition that they must meet the criteria of being a gypsy traveller.
How many people?
In terms of land supply, yes, absolutely, again, agree. It's the 11.54 year land supply that we robustly say that we do have. But again, as I say, it's the PPTS, the Traveller Site National Policy, is explicitly clear that, you know, where a site is acceptable in all other matters, the land supply doesn't come into it. In terms of the unsustainable location, no, I mean the inspector looked at this previously and concluded in the appeal decision that the proposal would be in an accessible location and relatively close to services and amenities and the primary road network. That's the inspector's findings. That's not necessarily what the council originally judged, but that is an extremely strong material consideration, and I wouldn't go against that. I wouldn't recommend going against the inspector's findings. There hasn't been the change in services to make it less sustainable than what was originally found. I think that goes down to
roads flooding.
Roads flooding. Yeah, again, that was all considered previously and in 2016 when we looked at this. The risks to the site that the inspector found was actually the flooding within the site, whether or not there would be impact on the living there. There is a condition in there to do with emergency egress from the site in case of flooding, so there is a backup plan should the roads become inaccessible. So that was covered by the inspector and has been retained through the previous considerations of the council, the last one. And yes, again, the other bits was to do with the intensification and the impact and character. It's that intensification and the additional built form which would affect the character and appearance of the landscape. And intensification is intensification of the built form, but also the use of the site, as in additional people living their lives. It has an impact, the same as it would a house. But the site is such, with the existing planting, etc., that when looking at it, it's been found that with a good landscaping scheme that there could be an improvement to the site, a betterment than what's existing. And again, to quote the inspector, she said, "I have concluded that the proposal would not have a material harmful impact upon the countryside. It is visually well contained and neighbouring properties are sufficiently far enough removed such that there would be no adverse impact on residential amenity." That's, again, is quite clear wording from the inspector.
Doesn't live there.
Okay. Wayne, as ward member.
Yes, Daniel, a number of questions. You keep referring back to the inspector, but that was on a single pitch on a site, which is very different to what we're looking at this evening. When the site in 2016 was approved from temporary to permanent, on this very committee, I was told, because I challenged the number, and now the number is 11.54 years, as two of the representatives have said, we were one short. Now, so we've approved something from temporary to permanent. We're in a situation today that we've got more than double what our 5-year land supply is. Now, in any situation, in any appeal, and I think some of the appeals haven't been mentioned this evening, there have been appeals, and we've won on the fact that we've got a 5-year land supply. So I think that's one that we need to take into account. Personal circumstance. So you're saying that the 5-year land supply, i.e. 11.54 years supply, is not material information, so we can't take that into account. Personal circumstances, let's just dwell on that for a moment. So you say that if they were to leave that site, pre or post where they are now, if they did get permission this evening, what personal circumstances would you expect somebody moving onto that site to hold? What is your definition that you would expect to see?
It's not in Appendix 1 of the planning policy for traveller sites. It sets out what is a gypsy and traveller, and that definition is all to do with transients, that they remain transients, that they travel for whatever reason, and that any permanent residence, non-travelling, is for a temporary basis due to education, ill health, age-related issues. Now, talking specifically about if the Gileses move off and someone else decides to move on, what would get picked up as part of our accommodation assessment, we interview everyone, as many sites as possible, interview absolutely every single pitch who are present, and that informs whether or not they are ticking the box.